There seems to be something weird happening with a game called Crimson Desert. Every time new gameplay of this game shows up, we all react the same way. We watch it, we pause for a second, and we all ask the exact same thing. Wait, is this actually real? Because what this game seems to promise, it gets to the realm of ridiculous. A massive fantasy open world, physics-driven combat, a dynamic NPC system, base building, crimes and punishment, mounts that go from horses to a mech. And somehow, this game also wants to be cinematic, story-driven, and completely single player, which naturally leads to the obvious concern. Is this game actually real, or is this just another case of a studio promising the moon and delivering a loading screen? Because even if half of what the game has promised seems to be true, Crimson Desert could quietly become one of the most important and interesting RPG games of the decade. Most people first heard about Crimson Desert because of its connection to Black Desert Online, the MMORPG. Since it had a similar name, it has the same developer house and the same flashy combat. In fact, Crimson Desert was originally announced as a prequel to Black Desert Online, so naturally a lot of players, myself included, ignored it at first. And look, no offense to MMO fans, but if you tell me that a game is a prequel to an MMO that I played once 5 years ago, I am gonna immediately put it on the category of maybe one day. You know what I'm saying? MMOs aren't everyone's thing, and we know that. But somewhere along the way, something changed. What started as an MMO prequel slowly started to evolve into something very different. A single-player, open-world RPG action adventure. Jesus, that's a lot of tags. And once that shift happened, the game suddenly started to look a hell of a lot more interesting. Because the more gameplay you watch, the more it seemed like Crimson Desert is trying to combine a lot of different ideas from a lot of different places. Some people compare it to The Witcher, some people compare it to Red Dead Redemption 2, and some people even call it a medieval GTA. And honestly, that's not the worst description. So instead of doing a top 10 reasons to be excited video, I wanted to ask a slightly different question. Why are people actually excited for this game? And maybe even more importantly, is it justified? If you start watching videos about Crimson Desert, you will notice something rather quickly. Everyone seems to be talking about the same things, about the same systems. And to be fair, they do sound pretty impressive, so I cannot blame them for that. First, the world itself. The game takes place on a massive continent called Pywell, which is filled with different regions, different climates, the biggest array of magical creatures that I've ever seen, huge cities, and even different biomes. There's everything here. And snowy mountains, dense forests, open plains, deserts, even sky islands. It's the kind of map that makes exploration feel like an actual adventure instead of just going from quest marker to quest marker. Speaking of, exploration isn't just about scenery either, because the world is packed with things to do. You can cook food for different buffs, you can hunt animals, you can craft your gear, you can mine resources, basically the kind of sandbox system that encourages players to mess around and find out things on their own. And then there's the NPC interaction system, because in most open world RPG games, NPCs only exist to either sell you stuff or give you quests, which honestly, it's okay. That's the norm. But in here, there are mechanics of trust and reputation. You can give gifts to characters, build relationships, and actually gain their trust. You can even get to the point where like the vendor will just give you discounts. You will get better prices for being a cool guy. This could turn cities and small towns from the typical RPG hub where you sell and craft stuff to an actual dynamic camp that you want to visit. And speaking of dynamic, there's also the crime and punishment system, which I know is not unique. Crimson Desert didn't invent the law, but in this system there are crimes that you will have to hide away, because if people notice, authorities will get involved. And there are even crimes that require you to wear a mask to be anonymous to commit such crimes, just like in Red Dead 2. Because in here you can be actually sent to jail. There will be consequences to your actions. Which again is where that medieval GTA comparison comes from. And look, if this game lets me swap between 3 different main characters at will, and then lets me commit crimes with said characters, escape, and be chased by an increasing amount of guards over time, yes, I can see why it's called the medieval GTA. And honestly, at this point, we might be getting medieval GTA before GTA 6, which is honestly just kind of hilarious. But the systems don't stop there. You can also manage your own camp, and it's more like building it from scratch and customizing it, which makes me call it a base of operations instead of just a camp, but you know what I'm saying, okay? Oh, and you can collect mounts, which are not just horses, no. These mounts go from wolves to dinosaurs, a mech, and a giant dragon. Dude, I am so in. If there is one thing I love, is the fantasy of a dragon rider, okay? But here's the part that made me look at this game differently. This single-handedly probably had the most attention online, because the combat of this system is not the button mashing style of every RPG. I'm looking at you, Elder Scrolls. Nor is it the Souls-like combat of literally every single game on the market right now. Please stop doing that. In here, we have a physics-based combo-driven combat. Characters slam each other into walls, they throw themselves off cliffs, they slingshot themselves over walls, and they start chaining together attacks in a way that seems more like an action game than an RPG. When it works, it looks chaotic in the best way possible. And that combination, systems, exploration, big world, big combat, big bosses, when you stack all of these systems together, the hype for this game starts to make sense. But hype doesn't always land on reality. So the real question becomes, how could a game actually pull all of this off? Here's the part about Crimson Desert that I think most people are overlooking. Most massive open-world RPGs are made by studios that specialize on single-player storytelling. But Crimson Desert comes from an MMO developer. The studio behind it built the Black Desert game, like I mentioned, a game that is known for its huge world, complex systems, and its flashy combat. And whether you like MMOs or not, you have to admit that those games do require a certain type of development experience. For example, they require systems, lots of them, economies, crafting loops, skill trees, and the list goes on. When Crimson Desert shifted away from being an MMO and became a single-player experience, those systems didn't just go away, they evolved. And that is actually one of the most interesting parts of this project. Again, at least for me. Because instead of building a single-player RPG from scratch, the developers took the foundation of a large-scale MMORPG and adapted it to a single-player narrative experience, which honestly explains why the game has so many interconnected mechanics. But the ambition doesn't even stop there, because this game is built on the studio's own engine, which I know sounds like a technical detail, but it's actually super important. Thanks to that, this game is not another Unreal Engine 5 mess waiting to happen, because when developers control their own engine, they can design systems specifically made for the kind of game they want to create. Physics interactions, environmental destruction, lightning simulations, large-scale world and large-scale battles, all is possible because they can tailor what they need, and honestly and visually it shows. Gameplay of Crimson Desert constantly highlights the dynamic lighting, the environmental scale, and the super highly detailed character animations. All of this is powered by the studio's in-house technology. Add into the mix cinematic boss fights, large mythical creatures, and dragons flying across massive landscapes, and suddenly the game feels less like a typical RPG and more like a sandbox adventure game. So now, the idea of a sandbox sandbox open world RPG built by an MMO studio doesn't sound that far-fetched. In fact, it sounds like it's the only studio that could have created something like this. But, and this is a really big but that leaves us one more problem, because ambitious games do have a history of collapsing under their own weight. Whenever a game looks too ambitious, there's always that moment where we all go, okay man, but what's the catch? Because we've seen this story before, right? A game shows incredible trailers, promise dozens of systems, huge open worlds, and dynamic interaction with NPCs. This is nothing new, but whenever the release day arrives, either half of those things magically disappear, or they don't even work, like the rest of the performance of the game. Looking at you, 2077, amazing redemption story, but damn, are you a prime example of someone who that bit on release day? So it's fair to ask. For one thing, the game has been in development for years. This game was originally revealed on 2019, and it has gone through multiple iterations and delays while the studio tries to redefine the direction this game is trying to take. And I understand that delays can be really bothersome, but that just means that the developers are really trying to polish this game and to get it right. There's also this fact that I don't see nearly enough people talking about, that the developers said that at launch, Crimson Desert will have no microtransaction. They say that buying the game is a transaction in itself for this premium single-player experience, which honestly is so refreshing to hear on this monetization era where the game is announced with DLCs and season pass before it's even released. I'm looking at you, Nintendo, what the f***? Can you stop doing that? But even with those positives, there are still real concerns. The biggest one is simply scope. The more systems a game includes, the harder it becomes to polish all of them. A game that tries to be, and I'm gonna read it because it's a list, a game that tries to be an RPG, an action game, a sandbox, a simulation, a narrative adventure, a base builder, what the f***, man, runs the risk of being stretched too thin. There's probably gonna be some systems that are half-baked because they were trying to polish some system that no one will really use. And that's the edge that Crimson Desert is walking on right now. But there's also a different way to look at it. Maybe the reason this game feels so unreal is because the developers spent years building the technology to back it up. So is Crimson Desert too ambitious? Honestly, maybe. But sometimes the game that looks impossible is the one that pushes the genre forward. Anyways, we won't really know until we have, as players, the game in our hands, which, if I did my editing correctly, is tomorrow. Holy Right now, Crimson Desert exists on a sort of a strange space. It's not a mystery, but it's not fully understood either. It's a game with massive ambition, but also a long development history and a design philosophy that seems to try and combine ideas from half the industry. Part Witcher, part Red Dead Redemption, part Breath of the Wild, and maybe just a sprinkle of medieval GTA. Okay, come on, you can see the comparison. 3 swappable characters? What other games let you do that? I'm not crazy, okay? You see it. Whether that combination works out or not, it's still an open question. But one thing is clear. This isn't just a generic open world release. It's a studio taking everything they've learned from years of MMO development and trying to condense it into a more focused experience. A single-player adventure, a giant sandbox, a fantasy world that might actually feel alive. And if it works, Crimson Desert could end up being one of the most surprising releases of this year, if not the decade. Or at the very least, a reminder that the most exciting games aren't the ones that everyone is already talking about. Sometimes they're the ones that make you pause the trailer and say, hold on, is that guy hypnotizing rats?